Just curious, what device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
My heels had barely touched the dock before I realized I was completely overdressed. And not in the glamorous, head-turning kind of way, but in the tight cocktail dress, lipstick smearing under the sun kind of overdressed. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner with family, something low-key to mark a casual Friday after a long work week. That's what my mother had texted. Just us, honey. Casual dinner for Jake. He got promoted. So naturally, I'd assumed maybe a backyard barbecue or a local Italian spot. Instead, I stepped onto a 70-foot yacht with champagne flutes clinking, fairy lights strung from mast to stern, and a damn saxophonist playing something jazzy that felt like a scene out of a rom-com, the kind where the protagonist is always the last to realize they're the outsider, the kind where everyone else is already in on the script. Jake, of course, was glowing. That brand of smug confidence that only ever comes from having your entire life celebrated as though you invented ambition. His promotion, vice president of client development at my dad's firm, shocker, had clearly turned into a full-blown party, complete with a signature cocktail named after him, the Jake Quake. I don't even know what was in it, but everyone on board was sipping it like it was holy water, toasting his drive and charisma, as if those traits hadn't been spoon-fed to him since the day he was born. I stood near the rail for a good 10 minutes before anyone even realized I was there. Not that I was trying to make an entrance, I've never been that girl. But when your own mother hugs you with one arm, mid-conversation, and says, "Oh, sweetie, glad you made it," without even making eye contact, something in your chest goes a little tight. I smiled, though. I always do, because that's how it's always been. I sipped my drink, water, no lemon, and watched as Jake gave a toast. He thanked Mom and Dad, the real MVPs, and cracked a joke about how he wouldn't have gotten here without being taught to negotiate bedtime at 5 years old. Everyone laughed. Dad slapped him on the back, pride shining off his face like the sun hitting the ocean. Nobody mentioned that I, too, had gotten a promotion, not just a title bump, but a real one, director of strategy for a Fortune 100 company with a corner office and a 7-figure budget. I'd told them last month over brunch. They had nodded. My mom had said, "That's great, honey, but is it stable? Will you still be able to visit at Thanksgiving?" I had worked through 2 Thanksgivings in a row, missed a birthday, ended an engagement, and sacrificed what little peace I had in order to get to where I am. But here I was again, standing in the shadow of a brother who had been handed the keys to the kingdom and still got praised for earning it. Eventually, I made my way to the buffet table, pretending to admire the shrimp cocktail while scrolling through my phone just to have something to do. That's when it hit me. I had never posted a photo of the villa. My villa. The one I had broken my back to design, finance, and build over the past 2 years. I documented the whole process privately, waiting for the right moment to show the world. And suddenly, right there, surrounded by laughter that didn't belong to me, I realized this was that moment. I opened Instagram, found the perfect photo, the one taken at sunset, with the light casting long shadows over the terracotta tiles and desert palms swaying in the breeze, and added a caption that felt like a punch. Built, not gifted, nothing more, nothing less. Within minutes, the likes started rolling in, and then the comments, some from friends who knew exactly what it meant, some from acquaintances who had no idea but loved the aesthetic. But I didn't care about the likes. I cared that I had finally said something without saying it. I cared that for once, I wasn't clapping politely while someone else stole the spotlight I'd earned. As I stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon while the party raged on around me, I caught Jake looking at his phone. He looked up, caught my eye, and for a split second, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or something closer to fear. I didn't smile, I didn't nod. I just held his gaze, then looked away. That night, I left before the cake was served. I walked off that yacht in my too tight dress and painful heels, and got into my car, where I sat for a full 5 minutes before driving away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there thinking, they'll remember this post longer than they'll remember that toast. And I was right. because by the time I got Kua, the messages had already started coming in, and none of them were from my family. When I woke up the next morning, there was a brief, fleeting moment of silence, one of those peaceful, pre-alert stretches when your phone hasn't yet started buzzing and the world hasn't reminded you of its endless expectations. And I let myself stay in that stillness for just a few minutes longer than usual, not yet ready to face the full consequence of a caption that, while made up of just 3 small words, had already begun spinning its own narrative faster than I could contain it. I hadn't posted it for drama. Honestly, I hadn't even posted it out of anger. I'd done it in the way a person lets out a slow exhale after holding their breath for far too long. Not loud, not flashy, but necessary. Still, as I finally rolled over, reached for my phone, and saw the number of notifications, dozens at first, then more than 100, it became immediately clear that my quiet act of self-assertion had turned into something else entirely. Something louder, something unstoppable. The post, a single photo of the desert villa with its long shadows stretching across the baked earth and the sky still tinged with burnt orange from the sunset, was deceptively simple in composition. No filters, no overblown hashtags, no fake poses or forced glamour. Just the house I'd spent 2 years of my life building, literally and figuratively. It wasn't a mansion, at least not by the standards of coastal elitism or celebrity opulence, but it was mine, bought with my own income, not a single dollar borrowed, inherited, or gifted. I'd made every design decision, dealt with every contractor, fought through endless zoning issues, and even spent a few nights curled up on the floor in an unfinished room when I was too tired to drive back to the city. After site meetings, this villa was not just a home. It was the proof that I didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. And yet it wasn't the architecture people noticed. It was the caption, built, not gifted. 3 words, 2 periods, and apparently enough implied meaning to split an internet in half. The comments started off friendly enough, colleagues congratulating me, old friends saying how proud they were, distant acquaintances marveling at the view and asking for design tips. But as the day wore on, the tone began to shift. Someone asked, not entirely joking, was that shade I felt? Someone else replied, well, if the shoe fits. There were inside jokes from people who had once been at family dinners, now turned outside observers. And then came the passive-aggressive responses from people who knew exactly who it was aimed at and didn't appreciate the implication. And then, buried somewhere between the compliments and the criticism, was a comment from my cousin Ashley, who's never been one for subtlety, saying, love the villa, wonder if the parents will throw you a yacht party next year. Oh wait, that one stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. My family didn't forget me because I was less successful. They forgot me because my success didn't come with strings they could pull or narratives they could control. Jake's promotion had been a family project from the start. Dad pulling corporate favors, Mom smoothing over his PR messes, everyone cheering from the sidelines like he was climbing Everest instead of walking into a job prepackaged for him. My promotion, that happened while I was alone in hotel rooms, eating room service and reading financial models at 2 a.m. No one knew how hard I worked because no one ever asked. By noon, the family group chat had gone completely silent. Not a single word, not even a thumbs up from my mother, who usually responds to any photo I send with at least a nice or an emoji that doesn't quite fit the mood. The silence wasn't surprising, but it was revealing. They'd seen it. Of course they had. They just didn't know how to respond. Around 2, my phone rang. It was Lauren, my best friend from college, the kind of person who doesn't call unless it's something important. She didn't waste time. I don't know what happened, she said, but that caption was a mic drop. I laughed, and for the first time that day, it wasn't bitter, it was genuine, because Lauren knew. She always had. She was the one who helped me assemble furniture in the villa when I was too broke to hire anyone, the one who stayed on the phone with me through every inspection failure and construction delay. She knew what that caption meant, not as an attack, but as a truth I'd carried alone for far too long. Later that afternoon, I drove out to the villa. It was still mostly empty inside. Just a few pieces of furniture, a fridge with bottled water, and my favorite leather reading chair in the corner of the main room. But walking through those echoing halls brought me a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened the sliding doors to the patio, stepped outside, and let the dry desert air hit my skin. There was no ocean, no saxophone, no clinking glasses or hollow toasts, just silence and sun and space that was all mine. That's when I saw it, parked quietly across the road, half hidden behind a bush, unmistakable in its familiar dented fender and faded bumper sticker from Jake's college days, my parents' car. They hadn't texted, they hadn't called, but they'd driven out here, presumably to see it for themselves, or maybe just to verify that the post wasn't photoshopped. I watched from the shadows as the car sat idle for a few minutes, then turned around and drove away without ever pulling into the driveway. I didn't chase them, I didn't call. I simply went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in that leather chair, legs folded underneath me, watching the sun crawl across the tile floor. They'd seen it, and now they couldn't unsee it. It's strange how, in the absence of words, you can still hear the noise that people are too cowardly to say out loud. The days following the villa post stretched out in that awkward, brittle way that time does when everyone is pretending not to be upset, not to be watching, and certainly not to be harboring judgments they wouldn't dare say to your face. The group chat remained in an eerie state of dormancy. No gifts, no weekend plans, no unsolicited forwarded memes from my dad about how Gen Z is ruining the economy, or how boomers built character by walking to school barefoot in the snow. Just a heavy, loaded silence, like the pause before a storm, where you can sense the tension gathering, but have no clue which direction it'll break. In that quiet, I planned what I told myself would be a simple, harmless gathering. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, just a small housewarming for the people who had stood by me, who had picked up the phone when I cried at 2 a.m. because drywall had collapsed, or permits had gotten delayed, or I couldn't figure out if matte black hardware was already out of style. I ordered catered food from a local place, the kind that does fresh grilled vegetables and chicken that actually tastes like something other than sadness. And I made sure to bring real wine, not the cheap kind I used to buy when my salary barely covered rent. I set the long wooden table I had chosen specifically for its imperfections. Every knot in the grain a reminder that beauty isn't always symmetrical, that sometimes strength is what's left after something splinters and holds anyway. I sent out invitations, simple texts, no digital RSVP or fancy links. Just a note to a dozen friends and, with an odd mix of reluctance and defiance, one to each member of my immediate family. No groveling, no begging, just, hey, having some people at the villa Friday night if you want to see it in person. My brother didn't reply. My mom said, we have plans that night, but maybe another time, which I knew meant never. My dad sent a thumbs up and nothing else. I don't know why I expected more. Hope, I guess, is hard to kill completely, even when you know better. When Friday came, the house buzzed with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Friends drifted through the rooms, admiring details I had fought for during the build. Exposed beams, reclaimed wood floors, those painfully expensive but worth every penny steel-framed windows that opened the whole living space to the desert air. Someone made a playlist, someone else lit candles, and for a few hours, it felt like I had finally stepped into a life that had been waiting patiently for me to catch up to it. But somewhere around 10, just as the group was thinning out and the last of the music had faded into conversation, a knock echoed from the front door. It was quiet, hesitant, not the kind of pounding that suggests urgency or anger, but the kind of soft, deliberate knock that tells you the person on the other side isn't sure they're welcome. I opened it to find Jake standing there, hands in his pockets, looking slightly disheveled and out of place in a way that didn't match his usual, curated confidence. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored button-down or expensive watch, just jeans and a plain t-shirt, like he'd been driving around unsure of whether to stop by at all. I was in the area, he said, as if that explained anything. I stepped aside without speaking, motioned for him to come in, and watched him glance around the room like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. The few remaining guests eyed him curiously, aware of the awkwardness but too polite to comment. After a few minutes of polite chatter, the room emptied out completely, and suddenly it was just the two of us, sitting across from each other on the patio as the last remnants of daylight slipped behind the ridge. He didn't compliment the house, he didn't apologize. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Was that post about me?" I considered lying. I considered softening it. But something in me, something tired, something angry, something that had finally learned to stop shrinking, refused to play nice for his comfort. "It wasn't about you," I said, pausing long enough to make sure he was really listening. "But if you felt it was, maybe that says something." He shifted in his seat, jaw tightening the way it always did when he didn't like what he was hearing but couldn't argue it outright. "I didn't ask for the party, so," he said, his tone defensive but not entirely hostile. "They threw it. I didn't even know until the day before." "And you went along with it," I replied. "Because you always go along with it. And they always show up for you." He looked at me then, not through me, not past me, but at me, as if trying to decide if I was the same person he grew up with or someone new entirely, maybe a bit of both. He left without another word. No hug, no goodbye. Just stood up, gave a brief nod, and walked out into the dark. The next morning, I found the damage, a long, deep scratch down the side of the front door, so perfectly placed it couldn't have been accidental, and a shattered bottle of wine, still sticky on the porch, its jagged remains glinting in the sunlight like broken promises. I didn't need a fingerprint kit or a confession, I knew, and still I didn't call him. I didn't confront anyone. I cleaned it up myself, slow and deliberate, then stood there in the doorway, staring out into the same desert horizon I had once found peace in, and let the silence hang heavy again. Because this time, the silence said more than enough. There's a certain point where anger dulls into something heavier, something less sharp and more suffocating, like a weighted blanket soaked in cold water, too thick to toss off, too clammy to bring comfort. And that's where I found myself the morning after I'd discovered the damage. The sun hadn't yet pushed past the hills when I stepped outside with a rag, a bucket of soapy water, and the kind of determination that doesn't come from resolve, but from sheer resignation, the kind that whispers, "If you don't clean this up, no one will," because as always, that was the truth. The scratch on the door wasn't minor. It was intentional, deep enough to split the sealant, a cruel slash down the wood like a signature left by someone who didn't have the courage to leave a note. And the wine bottle, what was left of it anyway, had dried into a dark crimson crust that looked too much like blood under the morning light, staining the tiles I had chosen so carefully, now transformed into a mess I couldn't unsee. It took nearly an hour to scrub away the residue, not because it was particularly difficult to clean, but because my hands kept trembling in this maddeningly slow way that made everything take twice as long. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even furious, not in the yelling, throwing things sense. What I felt was far worse than that. I felt discarded, again. And this time, it wasn't because of what someone had forgotten to do. It was because of what someone had chosen to do. I didn't call the police, not because I didn't want to file a report, but because the idea of explaining to a stranger that my brother might have vandalized my home out of bruised ego felt so profoundly exhausting that I couldn't bring myself to start. And honestly, I already knew how the conversation would go. They'd ask if I had any evidence, and when I'd say no, not directly, they'd remind me that without proof, it would just be a family dispute. And those don't go anywhere unless someone ends up in a hospital or dead. So instead, I called the security company, the same one that had installed the cameras, and asked them to check if any footage had uploaded overnight. And that's when the final blow landed. Apparently, the motion sensor on the front porch had glitched. The update they'd run earlier in the week had caused a delay in uploads, meaning the footage from that night was corrupted and unrecoverable. The one moment I needed proof, and all I had was an empty drive and the gut-churning certainty of who had done it. Still, I wasn't completely defenseless. I had something stronger than footage: context, timing, motive. And while I didn't plan to march into a courtroom with a monologue about betrayal, I did have my own arena of power, my own quiet stage, the digital space where people watch, listen, and read between the lines far more than they admit. So I wrote another post. No image this time, just text on a pale background, the kind of format people use when they're about to be passive-aggressive or overly honest, or both. I wrote, "Funny how some people can't handle real success. When you build something on your own, it scares the ones who've only ever been handed everything." I hit post and waited. It didn't take long. Within 15 minutes, the usual mix of fire emojis, applause gifs, and subtle jabs began flooding the comments. People knew. Even if they didn't know the details, they knew enough. My messages exploded with friends asking if I was okay, a few bold acquaintances fishing for drama, and one or two family friends who messaged things like, "Maybe you should keep these matters private," which only made me laugh out loud because if anything had been made private in my family, it was me. Jake didn't respond, not publicly, not privately, but I saw that he viewed the post, and that was enough. By early evening, the phone finally rang. My mother's name flashed across the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. The message, when I listened to it later, was what you'd expect. Concern buried under carefully controlled tone, the kind of message that says, "I'm calling because I should," not, "I'm calling because I care." She said, "We heard something happened at the house. Are you all right? Your father thinks maybe it was just a prank. Let us know if you need anything." Not a single question about what actually happened. Not a single acknowledgement that this might not be some random act of vandalism, but something far more personal and deliberate. I didn't call back. Instead, I did something that had become increasingly rare for me. I unplugged. I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and drove into the desert with nothing but a blanket and a thermos of coffee. I found a spot between two ridges, where the sky opened up like an ocean and the silence was so complete it made my ears ring. I laid there for what must have been 2 hours, watching the stars fade in, one by one, until the whole sky was full, not with answers, but with a kind of clarity that doesn't require language. When I returned home, I felt different. Not lighter, not better, but steadier. And that's when I got the email, time-stamped 3:14 a.m., from the backup server of the security company. One of the cameras, the one facing the side lot near the garage, had successfully uploaded a single frame. It wasn't perfect. It was grainy and half-lit, but there it was, Jake's car, parked crooked, driver's side door open. I stared at the image for a long time, heart pounding but mind calm. The truth was right there, frozen in pixels. And now, finally, I knew what I needed to do next. There's a certain kind of calm that only comes in the hours before confrontation, the kind of eerie stillness that creeps into your bloodstream like cold water before a plunge, leaving you aware, on edge, but uncannily composed, as though your body has already decided that the fight is inevitable and no amount of anxiety will change the outcome. I woke early that morning with a sense of finality that I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not vengeance, not even anticipation, just the quiet understanding that things, as they had been, could not continue. The email with the security image still sat open on my desktop, the blurry frame time-stamped and unmistakable. Jake's car parked sloppily near the villa's garage, no alibi, no escape hatch, no way to spin it into coincidence or misinterpretation. I had never imagined using surveillance footage as a tool of reckoning, but somehow, in this twisted family saga, it felt almost poetic. I didn't send the image to my parents. I didn't call Jake in a fury or confront him through a passive-aggressive post. Instead, I invited him, with the same calm tone I'd used weeks earlier, to come to the villa again. Want to see the new landscaping out back? I texted, as though nothing had happened, as though we hadn't both been sitting on opposite ends of a powder keg for months, maybe years. He replied with a curt, "Sure," and I gave him a time, 4 o'clock, just before sunset, when the shadows would stretch long and the sky would be painted in that soft, golden hue that always made the house feel more forgiving than it really was. When he arrived, he didn't smile. He didn't look at me like a sister. He looked at me like a problem he hadn't figured out how to solve yet. He was dressed better this time, collared shirt, hair combed, watch polished, but his eyes betrayed him. There was tension there, not fear exactly, but discomfort, the kind of stiffness people wear when they've been caught, but haven't yet decided whether to admit it. I led him through the villa, offered him water he declined, and finally took him out back to the patio, where the breeze was just strong enough to carry our voices, but not our words beyond the wall of desert pines I'd planted last season. I didn't waste time. I didn't offer pleasantries. I just pulled out the printout, the image I'd taken the time to enlarge, to sharpen, to present like a damning piece of courtroom evidence, and laid it gently on the table between us. He stared at it, jaw clenched, silence stretching until it was almost unbearable, until finally he leaned back in the chair and exhaled with a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a laugh, but something bitter and exhausted in between. "You really had to do this?" he asked, not denying it, not apologizing, just throwing the question out like a challenge, as if my need for accountability was somehow more offensive than his act of vandalism. "I didn't have to," I replied, voice steady, "but I did. Because I needed you to know that I see you, Jake, not the version mom and dad parade around, not the golden boy, but you, the one who broke something he didn't build, because he couldn't stand watching someone else build it without him." He shook his head, but it was weak, half-hearted. "You think you're the only one who ever had to prove something?" he said, voice low but sharp. "You think being the favorite is easy? I didn't ask for the yacht party. I didn't ask to be compared, to be paraded around like some damn trophy. And I didn't ask to be ignored," I snapped. Not loud, but forceful enough that he flinched. "I didn't ask for you to key my door and pretend it was a joke. I didn't ask for a lifetime of being told to wait my turn when I earned my place." For a moment he looked at me, not the way you look at someone during a fight, but the way you look at someone when you realize, too late, that they've grown into something you can no longer predict or control. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just sat there, breathing, fidgeting with the edge of the photo like he was trying to rub it out of existence. That's when I heard it, tires crunching on the gravel, my parents arriving late, unannounced, as if the climax of this family play wasn't already reaching its crescendo. They got out of the car together, walking up with stiff smiles and too smooth greetings, like everything could be patched over with polite conversation and maybe a casserole. I didn't stand to greet them. I let them come to me. "Nice place," my father said, scanning the patio like he was appraising it for resale. My mother reached for a hug that I didn't return. Instead, I gestured to the table, to the printout still sitting there like a centerpiece no one had the guts to acknowledge. Neither of them said a word when they saw it. I watched their expressions shift, my mother's mouth tightening into a line, my father's eyes narrowing just slightly, the kind of micro-expressions you only catch if you've spent a lifetime reading between the lines of what people aren't willing to say. No one asked what it meant. No one needed to. For several long moments, we stood there in silence, me on one side of the table, my brother across from me, and my parents frozen in place, as if waiting for a cue that would never come. The air was thick with the weight of everything we'd avoided, everything we'd buried, everything we'd refused to call by name. Eventually, I broke the silence, not with an accusation, but with a quiet invitation. "Come inside. There's something I want to show you." They hesitated just for a moment. Then one by one, they stepped over the threshold. Inside, the villa was dim, shadows stretching across the walls, the architecture echoing their movements like an old cathedral. I led them into the living room, where the blueprints of the house still sat framed against the wall, a reminder that everything they were standing in had once existed only in my mind, in late-night sketches and contractor emails and furious persistence. This, I said, gesturing to the space, to the floor beneath us, to the house itself, isn't about a caption. It's about being seen, finally. No one responded. And I didn't need them to, because as they stood there taking in what they could no longer ignore, I knew that something fundamental had shifted. They couldn't pretend not to see me anymore. Another year, another oops, we forgot. But this time, the forgetting had consequences. And this time, I wasn't the one who'd be doing the forgiving.